Today, we're speaking with Omar Simmons. Omar is the managing partner of Exaltare Capital Partners, or ECP, a private equity firm he co-founded to focus on growth and value creation in franchise businesses. Omar has closed over 20 principal transactions exceeding $2.6 billion in aggregate transaction value over a 25-year private equity career. He previously served as CEO of ECP Planet Fitness, one of the largest developers and operators of fitness clubs under the Planet Fitness brand, scaling the operation from 15 to more than 108 locations and serving approximately 600,000 members in 6 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. Earlier in his career, Omar was a director at Windjammer Capital Investors, co-founder and managing director at Reliant Equity Investors, and worked at premier growth equity shop Summit Partners. He also serves on the board of Unique Wax, In Express Urban Air, the Good Feet Store, and the International Franchise Association. Omar grew up in inner city Boston, raised by a single mother in subsidized housing. Sports became his early path to leadership, and he captained Princeton's track team before earning his MBA with honors from Harvard Business School. He went on to private equity, where he honed his ability to build and scale businesses. His leap into entrepreneurship came when he led a Planet Fitness franchise group, navigating growth, operational challenges, ultimately the crucible of COVID. Through it all, Omar has combined grit, resilience, and a deep belief that business is a team sport. Through his new Franchise Ascension Initiative with the International Franchise Association, Omar and his wife are also investing in expanding franchise ownership opportunities for underrepresented groups, using franchising as a ladder for wealth creation and community impact. His career underscores how leadership is about more than financial returns. It's about resilience, culture, and creating opportunity for all. Omar, welcome to the next podcast. You are from inner city Boston. First of all, welcome.
It's great to be here, Michael. Really excited.
And it's so amazing. When you read your background in inner city Boston, I was thinking, how does somebody triumph from all these disadvantages? But your description is all of the advantages you had. Such a wonderful thing to think about. First of all, as a parent, you've brought your kids up, no doubt, in better financial circumstances than you grew up in. But how do you preserve that kind of environment that gives the kid the kind of confidence that you had? Because we see in a lot of Tiger members, they have a lot of wealth, but not all of their kids are producing at the level that you did. What do you bring from that?
Yeah, I think that's something I think about a lot. And we talk about it a lot in Tiger and in other kind of peer groups that, successful parents, how do you kind of recreate that success with kids? Candidly, I think you got to have some struggle. I don't think you can develop character without some challenge. And so when you think about the curse of prosperity, there's certainly a lot of blessings, but the curse for another generation, no matter what lessons you try to impart, some things have to be lived and experienced and felt. Every kid is different. So some people need to maybe feel it in different ways or different intensity. But I do think there has to be some challenge. Being very conscious about how do I raise my kids in a wider spectrum of lived experiences, right? Like if everybody is like you in a really affluent neighborhood and you go to a private school, your world can become pretty narrow. And you lose the opportunity to learn some things that only can come from challenges that most people deal with. So I think that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is this idea of unconditional love, right? That we all matter, period, end of story. You don't matter because you go to a good school. You don't matter because you have a lot of money. You don't matter because of X, Y, and Z. But there's just some intrinsic value to who you are as a child. And then lastly, you have something to give, right? There's some superpower, talent where you can contribute instead of just being maybe a consumer or a vessel of somebody else's.
It's so interesting. Of course, my parents might disagree with this, but I felt I grew up in a period of conditional love. What did you accomplish today? And if you didn't accomplish it, were you worthy of our praise? I suspect my siblings would disagree, but clearly my wife grew up in a family of unconditional love. The point you're making is if there was one piece of advice I ever give to adults who are thinking about having kids, it doesn't matter what you give them. In fact, the more you give them, it's probably worse. But the one thing you have to give them is unconditional love, because that creates a kind of foundational emotional basis. And it sounded like you kind of went off into the world from that upbringing with a positive sense of possibility. Is that accurate?
I think so. I mean, I think the part that was hard is my tangible role models of what was possible wasn't super attractive, right? So, or they weren't broad. So I could be an athlete, which I happen to be athletic, so that probably helped. But at least that was like, okay, that's a way I can go to college. So that was a big positive. But again, I got lucky there, right? But there also were, drug dealers or gang leaders, which again, outside looking in, you may say, well, that's not nice or that's not, it's against the law. And again, all that's true. It's not like that's the most positive way to contribute to society. But if you saw the talent of these individuals, right, and you looked at the raw skills and attributes and abilities that they had, they would have been phenomenal entrepreneurs, right? If they had a wider scope of what's possible, if they had more hope, they would have been incredible activists or community organizers or public servants. Or, I mean, there's a million things they could have done, but they didn't see that as for them. They didn't see that was a possible path. I think the thing that helped me was my mother did do a lot of things to give me a broader set of exposure. There was a time where I was bused to a predominantly white affluent suburb for school. There were times where I was put into sports and that forced me to travel. But she had to sacrifice to do that. I mean, she would drive me an hour a day sometimes to go to a particular school or to go to a track meet or something while working two jobs.
These are the real heroes of America. Where did your mom, a single mom whose husband had a drinking problem, you just said, where did she get the sort of sense of how to do this? Where did that come from?
God bless her soul. She's not here anymore. So I always wonder this. I think she cared. And I think, again, this idea of community, right? There were other people in the community that were struggling with similar issues saying, how do I do this? It's not that different than Tiger in a way, but you have to be open. You have to be willing to learn and try some things. You got to put yourself out there, right? And I wasn't really important to her. And I think she wanted to figure it out, right? I mean, like, that's why, when she put me in that busing program in Boston, it was competitive, right? Like, again, I didn't appreciate it at the time. I didn't want to go to school with a bunch of rich white kids. I mean, I was like, well, I want to go on a bus for an hour or two a day. And then it wasn't super convenient and she would have to drive me half the time, but like she would just figure it out. You appreciate it more as you get older, but at the time I was pretty clueless, just probably complaining.
You couldn't have got to be where you are today if you hadn't navigated setbacks from time to time effectively, injuries as an athlete, challenges of scaling a business. I think you even had an existential crisis in COVID with one of your investments or your companies. So where has grit and resilience mattered more than credentials in shaping your success? And when you're looking at hiring key people or managing people, how do you factor in failure and grit and resilience as part of success?
Grit is more important than credentials. Credentials can get you in the door. Grit will make you successful once you're in the door. Sometimes the credentialing is a little more important. I won't lie, going to places like Princeton and Harvard and certain jobs that I took, I did consciously because I did feel that I would be an African-American guy from the inner city with no kind of networks or connections. I would benefit disproportionately from that validation.
Yeah.
Is that good? Is that fair? It's the
real.
world. It's real.
It's real.
And that was my analysis. And I think it's still true.
You know, when people say, I went to MIT undergrad and got an MBA at MIT, I'm at least aware going into meetings when I say I'm an undergrad and grad at MIT. That sort of sets the stage in a way that people knowing nothing about me make all sorts of assumptions. And you've got, Harvard and Princeton, it kind of sets the table. There's just no way around it.
Yeah. And does that mean I'm better than somebody else at something or somebody else is better? Not necessarily. Now, to your point, when I'm hiring people, I try to actually
Get past that.
get past that because I
Yeah.
know better than, some middle or bottom quartile at Princeton, right?
Yeah.
They're just a better fit for this particular job. And so, and one of the reasons why can be grit. So I'm not particularly great at, I would say, inspiring grit, drive, or motivation. I'm not, going to give halftime speeches, win one for the Gipper kind of guy. And I am sensitive to people, though, that will run through a wall, I've seen in so many different contexts, athletically, academically, business, drive just means a lot. And, there's that old saying, people underestimate what you think. They overestimate what you can accomplish in a year, underestimate what you can accomplish maybe in a decade. Like if you have drive, you will compound that learning and that growth. And you'll look back and be like, how did that guy or that gal reach that level of success? They just wanted it more.
You think you can cultivate grit in people? I mean, if I hired you when you were just out of Harvard, you were pretty well baked at that point. And if you didn't have the grit that you got there, you're probably not going to get it on the job. But I'm curious, the nature of what you do employs so many people. How do you institutionalize it, or can you?
Look, I have a growth mindset. I believe in the growth mindset, but I personally don't make bets assuming that I can change adults' drive, the baseline of drive that they have. I would say this, though. I do think you can tap into people's why. Everyone's doing something for a reason. And I think when you really push, it's a reason that's beyond just their own comfort or financially. And I think the best leaders can tap into that. But I don't assume that I can change. If I see somebody that's like, look, they're only going to work this hard, I assume that's going to change. And if I have to give them some speech and they really improve for a week, that's not good to me because that's just a burst of energy. It's not an intrinsic drive.
I think you're getting at this issue as a manager. How much can you change? You can't change the stripes on a zebra, so to speak. How much can you mold, and how much is it given? Sometimes maybe you can help somebody blossom. In other words, they have the potential, but it hasn't been fully baked. But you can't really add. I can't make somebody smarter than they are. I need to get a sense of their intelligence. I can't create drive. I need to get a sense of their drive. Maybe certain work habits I can help, but if they're a slouch, they're not coming in at 8 o'clock every morning and getting to work. How much of a person, when you're hiring them, is mostly baked? And when have you seen transformations occur because either of your leadership or situations?
Again, I think of myself. So there were times where I'm sure I was more motivated, more productive, more effective than others. I was a late bloomer in a lot of ways. I think I was kind of a knucklehead when I was young. And so I know it's possible, but I think managers, kind of like a lot of coaches, they can overestimate their ability to be the catalytic change, right? Like the source of the change. And even if you can do it, the thing I advise a lot of my CEOs is that the best return on your time? And I know that sounds selfish, but if every human has a unique recipe to unlock their optimal potential, given how competitive the world is, you don't usually have the latitude to make that bet on every single one of your direct reports, right? So you have to be very thoughtful about, is the juice worth the squeeze, or is it better to just hire someone that's a better fit, right? And I think the reality is it's very rare. Now, there are times you have no choice, you can't afford anyone else, or you're stuck, but I think in general, you have to go in with the working assumption. And a lot of my experience as a manager, as a leader, and as an investor, if you making a bet you're going to make a zebra have different stripes, probabilistically, it ain't going to work out well.
Dad, did you know that 1 in 5 kids in the United States have learning and thinking differences like dyslexia and ADHD? You've said many times at Tiger 21 how you've observed these differences show up among highly successful entrepreneurs. Traits like creativity, unconventional thinking, and intense focus become extraordinary advantages when properly supported. Dad, can you tell listeners how understood.org is doing important work in this space?
Sure. Understood.org helps millions of people who think and learn differently unlock their full potential. By giving individuals, families, and educators practical tools and a supportive community, they help convert perceived limitations into opportunities for growth, success, and impact. This season, we're matching donations up to $10,000 per show, $100 per gift to Understood in order to strengthen that mission. Visit understood.org to learn more or go to muse.com/giving. That's MUUS.com/giving, or the link in the episode notes to contribute. So you had this amazing value creation, grew from 15 to over 100 stores. There came a point where you sold the business, you had your liquidity event. What was clearest that made you sell? Was there a defining moment, or how was it that you came to make that decision?
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I mean, we bought the business. I became CEO pretty quickly, a little bit of a battlefield promotion. Like I wanted to be more of a grandparent. I was the executive chairman when we closed. So I wanted to have direction, but not all the headaches of being a CEO. And then pretty quickly it's like, I got to be the CEO. It was the first time I was a CEO, first time as an operator.
How old were you?
Early 40s. It was like going from being a third base coach to a player. The part that was good was I was really clear on what the value creation levers were, like what mattered. The part that I underappreciate is what you were just drilling me on, is the human side of it. So I remember one of my first board meetings at Planet Fitness. I had a private equity partner in there with me. And they're like, hey, you got a high margin. We could sell something for $10 a month or $20 a month. That was our 2 memberships. And obviously $20 a month was more profitable, fixed cost business. So I had this board members like, hey, you know what? I realized you should sell more $20 a month memberships than $10 a month. And I was like, it's higher margin. You should do it when you open the store because that's when most people join. And I was sitting there thinking like, that used to be me. Like I was that private equity guy going, hey, the math goes up if you sell a high margin thing. The question is, how do I get some human beings to actually do that? That's where the magic is. So I think the PE side of me helped me know, okay, this is a good lever to focus my time on. What I had to learn is how to have strategies that resonate with human beings at scale, right? Doesn't just work for Michael Jordan or some superstar employee, but like your average employee. And so I think that was a big learning. But at the end of the day, yeah, we grew the business, and the first financial partner was more of a debt firm, and they had an institutional fund, and they wanted to raise another fund. In order to raise another fund, they wanted to sell. So I was like, okay, yeah, we grew the business, I don't know, from 15 to 50 units, and we grew EBITDA a lot, and they were going to get a really big win. And I was like, well, I just kind of got started. I've enhanced the management team. We'll just buy you out. So we buy them out, and then we grow it and double it again. And then we're like, okay, now we have institutional investors, and they were banging on us every week, like sell, 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 because they're in that institutional treadmill where it's like, hey, I gotta book a win as quickly as possible. The long story short, we're going to sell the company. As soon as our busy season is over in early 2020, we're talking to investment bankers, and then bam, early 2020, COVID comes, right? This black swan event that you didn't expect. So now I'm like, oh, geez, maybe I should have sold a lot earlier. That wasn't a great call, right? But we get through it, and we're really fortunate. The vaccines come out a lot faster. We have certain states where we are making money. We never missed a debt payment. We had to lay off a ton of people, 1,500, but we could hire a lot of them back. We started taking a lot of market share. Ultimately, we weren't for sale. There were a couple of people saying, hey, would you sell? Initially, I was like, I'm not talking to you. You just want to buy me because I've been shut down. My EBITDA, my profits are low. You think this is an opportunity. And then a couple of them was like, no, we can look past all that. I started seeing people getting deals done. There was a lot of money sloshing around at the time. And I was like, well, if I find the right partner, I'd be willing to take some chips off the table. And so we talked to a couple of people, and it was a group that we really respected. And we said, yeah, well, I still am a very large and probably the largest personal investor in that business. The business is doing fine. But we were willing to sell majority control, one, because it was the right time. We'd been in it for a while. Two, I do think it was time for a new coach, right? Like we needed someone else maybe to kind of drive the next phase of growth. And three, I think it was just a really good risk reward for a guy that had all his eggs in one basket. To be able to diversify after a near-death experience made a lot of sense.
You and your wife recently launched the Franchise Ascension Initiative for underrepresented groups. What's it about and how's it doing?
Yeah, so when I sold the business, it's actually my wife's idea. We were at the International Franchise Association. I was on the foundation board. She looked around and was like, there's not as many business owners that are people of color. And it's ironic because franchising is run by people of color. They're the consumer, they're the employees, they're the backbone of the economy, some would argue. But they don't get the benefits, the joys of ownership. At the time, I've just spent a lot of time studying things like the racial wealth gap, right? Where, since Reconstruction, the racial wealth gap hasn't improved much, despite extraordinary improvements in education and socioeconomic opportunity. And, you live in different neighborhoods now. That number hasn't moved very much. I think the average white person makes like 8 times the median black person. And it's been around 10 for a really long time, decades, right? It's probably going the other way right now, right? For a lot of reasons. And that's just one way to slice it racially. There's other ways we can slice it. There's clearly concentrations of wealth, right? And so our thing was, we think franchising is great. We think capitalism is great. How do you make it more inclusive on-ramp into wealth creation? Because candidly, if you look at a lot of the social ills, a lot of it comes down to, do you got money or wealth, right? And I mean wealth is a distinct concept from income. And it's hard to get wealth in this country without owning. And one of the best ways to do it is owning businesses. And one of the safer ways to own a business is franchising. One of the things we loved about franchising and why we created the Franchise Ascension Initiative, you don't have to go to Princeton or MIT or Harvard to be a good franchisee. But there are a lot of things you do need to know about how you select a good franchisor and what questions do you ask. And, because there's people that will just sell you a franchise because it's in their best interest, but not in your best interest. So we said, okay, how do we expand the talent pool that goes into franchising? And how do we make it such that there's more opportunities for both sides, for people that want more franchisees so they can grow and people that want more business ownership? And so we went to the International Franchise Association and said, look, we'll seed this. We'll co-create it. We're kind of be the high-level visionaries. You guys can run it on a day-to-day basis. Do you think this is a good idea? And they said, this is a tremendous idea. And they helped us. We raised a bunch of money in a couple of days or a couple of months, and then we kind of built some programming around it. And essentially, we have a lot of the curriculum to teach people how to be an effective franchisee and how to be a good business owner and how to select the right franchise. And so what we do is we work really hard to get really talented, driven people from all different walks of life that may have been, might not have had a rich uncle or someone to kind of tell them how to do it. And we match them with mentors. We put them through a curriculum that's pretty rigorous. And at the end, they get to meet a lot of different people in the franchising industry that want talent.
Is there a way that you have a metric of success, or could you be just a little more specific?
So I think the first class was about 20 people, maybe about 17 graduated from the program. This class, the second class, is kind of mid-30s. It's still early days, but our expectation is we'll have a high percentage of those people go into franchising generally, with the ultimate measure of success being how many of them are going to own franchise businesses, right? And so they're in that early part of the journey. They're talking to franchisors. They're trying to find the right business to buy. And so when we look back a couple of years from now, what we want to be able to say is, look, we've got, people that weren't, maybe most of the people don't own any franchise. There may be a couple that own one or two, but the idea is get more business owners and get the business owners that exist bigger so that there's more jobs being created, more wealth created in different communities. That's how we're going to measure success.
And would you imagine these graduates provide superior investment opportunities for backers?
Yes, no question about it. One of the things I found, again, as an investor, I find people that from distinct backgrounds, underrepresented groups, marginalized groups, however you want to define it. When we were talking about the drive and those sort of things, like you have to overcome some stuff, you build some muscle and some strength that's really a competitive advantage. And I found as entrepreneurs that had to overcome some things are often just really special. And these people are really smart, but really driven, and they're extraordinarily well prepared. I mean, just to get in the program, it's a pretty rigorous application process. It's pretty similar to getting in like HBS or something. And then they got to go through the 6-month accelerator program. And so when they go through that program, when they come out, they're ready. I think it's an extraordinary investment opportunity and something that me and my wife need to think about along with IFA about like, how do we maybe institutionalize that? Because there's still a capital gap. And so how do we kind of there's a lot of people interested in backing people, but how do you kind of make that a little bit easier so there's less friction?
You're leading right into one of my last questions. How do you balance the dual goals of profit and purpose in your work?
I don't see it. I see it as a false dichotomy. Like, I don't think of it as...
Well, they're not mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually exclusive. Yeah, that's the way I would say it. So I think my purpose, I guess, is to have a positive impact to my communities and to the country and to the world and to my family. And I think I can do that by the way I do business, by the way I treat people, the choices that I make. I also can do that by what I do with my wealth and my time and my gifts, my network. I hope there's a lot more things like the Ascension Initiative, and I think there's more growth for programs like that. How do you create more opportunity for others? I think of the profits as the fuel, right? Like, I think Walt Disney said something to this effect, but he's like, I don't make movies to make money. I make money to make movies, something like that. But I think the idea was, money is just a way to amplify your impact.
There's a range of people who are incredibly philanthropic to not at all. And it's so interesting when you describe your background, instead of talking about the deprivations of your youth, you really talked about the gratitude that you had for your mother and grandmother. And something about you has cultivated a sense of gratitude and a sense of giving back. But we know many people who've enjoyed great success who are not philanthropically involved and at least don't express gratitude as a part of sort of their core view on the world. What do you do when you meet somebody like that? Do you fight it? Do you try and help them see something different? You must have had that experience where it's frustrating because you're obviously coming to this from a unique position, but it is frustrating to see people who don't have that sense of gratitude or desire to give back.
It's a great question. And I guess I would say I'm blessed because it's easier for me. And it's easier for me because I'm a descendant of slaves, and I can so clearly see how others literally gave their lives for me to have opportunities that I've enjoyed for my life. And it's a very distinct and obvious thing. I also have had the benefit of giving back and feeling extraordinarily fulfilled through that action. And you get to a point, Michael, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where like that feels better than making another nickel, because you can make another nickel, right? And you've done that. But does it move the needle the same way as the ripple that comes from helping someone else learn how to make a nickel, right? So I think I've had the benefit of being in an environment where it's very clear to me. And so my going in assumption is people that don't naturally give back must have had a lived experience where they don't appreciate somebody invested in them. I don't believe any of us are kind of one man or one woman success stories. There was a team. Somebody raised them and fed them and housed them and did a bunch of stuff for them to be successful. And as humans, because we need each other, I can't imagine not wanting to pay it forward. It's kind of like you look at it on the outside looking in, it makes no logical sense why you would do that. But you love them to death and you're going to do everything you can because, and when you get into it, you realize like this is hard, but it's more than worth it. And someone did it for me.
If people had questions about franchising and a young franchisor or potential franchisor, do people ever call you out of the blue and say, could I ask you a question?
Certainly. I'm on LinkedIn, or we have a website at Exaltare Capital. Those are places where people can reach us.
Thanks so much for being with us. Have a wonderful day.
Have a great holiday, Michael. Thanks again for the time. It was great.